brainstorm.
Today's episode of Killer Means Awesome is brought to you by Excuse AI. From the company that brought you Choppy Streams comes the first and only AI-powered personalized excuse creator app. Need a credible sounding reason for getting out of something at the last minute? Well, you have no excuse if you're not using Excuse AI. All right. Kicking off a new season, this time under the new umbrella name.
Killer Means Awesome. KMA. I'm recording today from KMA Studios.
That's right. You cleared that. And so we feel good, solid ground legally.
And we are sending out greetings to ships on the sea and all troops abroad.
Of course, everyone. And we do have a global audience as we feature each week the listeners from various locations.
Tell us where some of our listeners are recently.
Hello to Durham, North Carolina. Right?
Hey, Durham.
It's like a college town.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in that triangle there.
Right. Like the Tobacco Road or whatever.
Sure. Is that where Bull Durham takes place, or is that something different?
That is exactly where it takes place.
Never saw
Durham
it.
Bulls. Yeah. Well,
Never
it's a good
saw it,
movie.
yeah.
And let's also say hello to Marlette, Michigan. Hello, Marlette.
Oh, man.
Sounds cool.
Hi, Marlette. I wonder where on the mitt Marlette is.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
That's going to be fun to look that up.
Well, yeah,
and
it
then
is.
we have to say hello to the listeners in Maple Ridge, British Columbia. You know, we have a lot of listeners in Canada, which I find just exciting.
Yeah, we sure do. Maple Ridge. I wonder if they do the maple syrup up there.
It
You got to
sounds
figure
like
you
they
got
should.
some. It feels like you got a bunch of pine trees up there, British Columbia.
Absolutely. I mean, that is like, I think of Canada, I think of the flag, and I think of syrup. And I think that must be their, state liquid or what, a special
Yeah.
designation for syrup, right?
Yeah.
It's in all the airports. You always can get syrup.
I remember there was a news story back in the day where just an ungodly amount was stolen from some warehouse. I mean, it was like tons and tons of maple syrup were stolen.
Right. And
up in
probably
Canada.
impacted the global supply because it all comes from Canada.
Yeah, it feels like it.
It's like tankers on this, like they're, whoa. Suddenly, like people are looking at us like, we're holding the last gallon of water. So Doctor, this is season 3. It is the first season technically under the Killer Means Awesome naming.
Yeah, it's got an extra little sparkle to it because we got this new rebrand, and I believe corporate has approved it.
Yes. Everything's been approved. Airtight to start the season.
Okay. But the other thing that's exciting, it's the first show under the rebrand. It's also the first show of season 3, and we are moving on. We've done shipwrecks. We've done
Love
biographies. What are we doing today?
So we're kicking off season 3 with the Killer Inventions theme.
Fantastic.
Each episode will include the story of one invention, perhaps the story behind the inventor, maybe the story behind how it became that inventor's obsession, could be any story involving an invention, could even be a technical walkthrough of an invention. What do you think?
That all sounds great. I definitely can check some of those boxes today. And as I mentioned last week, I feel like I got a hot one here. So let's get into it.
Colonel Troyer, take it away for Killer Inventions, Episode 1.
Love to. Thank you for the invitation. A quick note at the top. Today's show is for grown-ups.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't mean any particular age because, as we both know, I mean, even 55-year-olds, there's some that haven't grown up. So
guilty. Right.
Just as a trigger warning, though, if you're a parent, you're listening with kids younger than, say, 18.
Okay.
Grown-up themes and situations may be discussed. If you're listening alone and you're younger than 18, please come back next week. But for now, see yourself to one of the podcast exits in front or behind your seat.
And plenty to listen to in season 2, right? Just go listen to season 2.
Of them. biographies. Those are history.
So interesting.
Okay. Our story today starts in Switzerland.
The mountains. Yeah.
Yeah. The hills are alive.
Chocolate and timing. Really great timing.
This was keep the time. January 11th, 1906.
1906.
Yeah, 1906. In Baden, Switzerland, a baby boy is born named Albert Hoffman. He's the oldest of 4 children.
Okay.
His dad's a tool maker.
Nice.
The family's Protestant, and little Albert, he's a smart kid, loves to be outside. He's fascinated by the natural world, plants, animals, all that stuff. As he grows up and as it becomes time for him to go to university, due to his love of the natural world and science, he decides to study chemistry. So that's what our hero is going to be studying.
Ooh, a chemist from Switzerland.
Yeah.
I like this. This is interesting. But this is not a biography.
No, but I think it's a good way to wean from biography to invention, to start with a little biographical.
You cleared this under the banner of Inventions, not...
Yeah, no. Okay. Don't you worry. Give it a hot second. So when he gets to the University of Zurich, go Lions, he decides, chemistry. That's what I'm going to do, chemistry. He is a good student. He finishes right on time. He graduates, and he goes to work for a company called Sandoz Laboratories.
Oh,
and this
sounds sinister.
Yeah, doesn't it? Kind of.
Yeah, it's like a James Bond movie. Yeah,
a little bit. Like the villain would work there. But anyway, he now this is a pharmaceutical company, and now we're in Basel, Switzerland.
Okay,
sounds lovely.
Is that where the ingredient comes from?
B-A-S.
I think it's spelled with an E. Yeah.
E-L. Yeah. It's more like where they make basal cell carcinoma.
Is that a homonym? Is that what they call a homonym? Or am I getting that confused with palindrome? You don't go backwards. Okay.
But anyway, so
he's a chemist.
He's a young chemist, and one of the projects which companies
is this Breaking Bad? Is this he's going to go Breaking Bad now? Because what other chemist, like besides Breaking Bad, do we hear of?
Just don't get ahead of the story here.
Right. I'm not getting
one of the projects which companies like Sandoz regularly undertake is to look at plants and compounds which have been used throughout history and appear to have medicinal purposes, and they take these things that humans have used forever and they really drill down and try to figure out, okay, what's going on here? What's the mechanism that caused people, say in the Middle Ages, to use this plant for something, and then to figure out, like, hey, can we figure out new medicines which can be derived from this plant? Okay.
Right.
Now, one of the substances that these industrious chemists decide to look at is a fungus which grows on the rye crop. So
there's a fungus among us on the rye crop.
Yeah. Okay. And it's a naturally occurring fungus.
Specifically to that crop.
Yeah. Seems to show up on rye. And it's called ergot.
You have to catch it in the rye. Okay. Sorry.
Very good. And it's spelled E-R-G-O-T, ergot.
Okay.
This fungus has been known all the way from antiquity as having, medicinal value, but also it can be toxic. Like there's, documented occasions where it seems to have gotten into the food supply, it's in the rye crop, and then, some of it, the village eats it and they are poisoned. But anyway, so we know that ergot, but then by the time in the Middle Ages, for instance, midwives are using it in some form to help with the process of childbirth and the postpartum recovery.
Interesting. Okay. So in a beneficial way.
Yeah. So it's medicine, poison,
take your pick.
Depends on the dose. Okay.
Roll the dice type of thing. Is it sort of like that risk reward? I'm going to, it's like, I'm bored. Well, I'm not going to take the risk. I'm dying of pain. I'm going to take the risk.
Yeah, if I'm trying to push out a baby, like, go ahead. Let me try it. Can you imagine getting medical care back in the day? I mean, just the whole concept that like the barber is the same guy as the surgeon. That's a bummer.
Yeah, that's terrible. I mean, it makes sense, efficiency wise.
There's something about the bone saw. Like I hadn't even thought of a bone saw since I read about the Civil War. Okay, anyway.
Yeah, and I also feel like in the shipwrecks when they cut off the guy's leg, it's like, and then he lived for a day. And it's like, oh, Jesus. Like, why'd you put him through that? Like, if you didn't think there was a high degree, Anyways.
Okay. But anyway, so our hero, Albert Hoffman, he's toiling away, and he's playing around with this ergot. He's breaking it down. He's trying to figure out what are the compounds in there. What new compounds can we make from it? He's 32 years old. We're now in the year 1938. He synthesizes the 25th in a series of compounds based on this ergot fungus. And, he's like, okay, that it looks nice. It has kind of a beautiful structure. He does a little bit of experimenting on it, but he doesn't see anything immediately useful about it. He does a few little experiments, whether on animals or whatever, and he's like, he puts it on the shelf, basically. So that's in 1938. So one of the things is that, okay, they've used it all through time, but now we have new, technology. We have microscopes. We have things like that. We have better understanding of chemistry. Let's look at this fungus and find out, what are the chemical agents in there? What is the composition of this fungus? What are the parts that are making it somehow useful? And can we isolate those and maybe experiment with them or combine them with new, what I mean? It's just like play with it. Part of his job literally is the around and find out kind of thing. It's like, just play with it. He thought that just based on this thing about the midwives in the Middle Ages, he said, I'm probably working toward a medicine here that's going to be helpful in obstetrics. That's probably, if we eventually get a usable medicine, we have a pill, it's going to be to go to OBGYNs, basically. Okay. So he puts it on the shelf, and then 5 years later, 1943, he operating on what he would later describe as intuition. Hoffman returns to that compound, and he says, I'm still curious about that. I liked sort of the way it kind of looked on paper, and I liked, let me pick it up. So he starts working with it, and he's in the lab, and then he's wrapping up for the day, and he's getting ready to head home, and he starts to feel a little bit weird. He's like a little bit disoriented. He's a little bit kind of restless. He's not sure what it is. He goes home. He says, you know what, I'm going to lie down and close my eyes. He finds that even with his eyes closed, and 2 hours after getting home, and now I'm quoting, he says, I was perceiving an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes, with intense kaleidoscopic play of colors. Wow.
He was tripping,
exactly, tripping. So 2 hours later, the effects start to die down, and he's like, okay, what the hell just happened? Like,
wow, can you imagine?
And he thinks back to the day at the office, and he's like, okay, I didn't ingest anything. I was working in the lab with stuff, but the only thing he can come up with is like, could it be that like the powder that I was like, the stuff was touching my fingertips? Like, is it possible that I absorbed something? But he doesn't know of any medicine that would be that powerful that just by touching it, with his fingertips.
Oh, so he didn't try it. I thought he maybe was sampling it.
No, he didn't try it. He had he had just been working with it in the lab with his hands.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. Whoa.
So he's curious. And so 3 days later, on April 19th, 1943, he says, okay, I'm going to settle this once and for all. And this is the old days. Like, I don't think scientists do this nowadays, but he separates out what he considers to be an extremely tiny dose of this compound, which is called lysergic acid diethylamide.
Uh-huh. And I know, better known by an abbreviation.
Well, we haven't got there yet. And he says, you know what? I'm going to take 0.25 milligrams of this thing. Okay?
0.25?
0.25 milligrams.
Wow, that sounds like a very little, like a tiny amount.
Just based on all the other stuff he's worked on, he's like, I'm not going to feel anything. But this time there's no doubt at all. He begins suffering noticeable disorientation, has trouble speaking coherently. He says, I now I better get home. Later on, years later, he says, he recounts what happened, and he says, I asked my laboratory assistant, who was informed of my self-experiment, to escort me home. We went by bicycle long, no automobile being available because of wartime restrictions on their use. On the way home, my condition began to assume threatening forms. Everything in my field of vision wavered and was distorted as if seen in a curved mirror. I also had the sensation of being unable to move from the spot. Nevertheless, my assistant told me later that we had traveled home very rapidly. Finally, we got home safe and sound, and I was just barely capable of asking my companion to summon my family doctor. So,
wow.
Thus begins, on April 19th, 1943, a day which is now known throughout the world as Bicycle Day.
Oh, interesting.
The first ever LSD trip. You were correct.
That is okay. Wow, incredible.
And it's basically a bad trip, at least in that moment. Okay, so he's back home now. He's hallucinating. His neighbor stops by and he's convinced she's a witch.
Can you imagine? People must have thought he was possessed.
He has hours and hours of incredible visions, sometimes terrifying, sometimes divine, but he does worry throughout that he has potentially permanently lost his mind. And he's even in his
like my worst nightmare.
Even in his inebriation, he's thinking, I wish I had left a note for my kids and my wife.
Oh boy.
About how much I loved them, and about, that this was just part of an experiment at work. Finally, 10 hours later.
Terrifying. Who wants to put themselves through that?
Nobody. And 10 hours later, it starts to subside. He eventually, in the wee hours of the night, finally falls asleep exhausted. But here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, he wakes up and he says he feels amazing.
Whoa.
He says, I woke up the next day.
Thought he's going to wake up with clarity like, I'll never do that again.
Yeah.
Then he's like, whoa, never felt better.
He says he woke up feeling refreshed with a clear head, though still somewhat tired physically. A sensation of well-being and renewed life flowed through me. Breakfast tasted delicious and gave me extraordinary pleasure. When I walked out into the garden, in which the sun shone now after a spring rain, everything glistened and sparkled in a fresh light. The world was as if newly created. All my senses vibrated in a condition of the highest sensitivity.
Wow.
So,
I get that partly in that when I had my wisdom teeth pulled, you needed to have someone drive you home.
Yeah.
So a friend of ours, we don't get into his name because we don't like revealing personal identifiable information on our show. But no. When I was, I had my wisdom teeth out, my friend came, picked me up afterwards, and I had this weird sensation in which I suddenly was home. Like I was suddenly in my apartment.
Isn't that weird?
And I don't remember getting there. So I kind of remember getting in the car and then I was home. But the difference is the next day I woke up really groggy. Like this guy woke up, he feels great. I woke up groggy.
Okay. Hoffman knows that this is a very, very powerful medicine, even in tiny doses. He tells his coworkers, and then, one by one, some of them volunteer to do the test, but at even smaller doses than he did. Here's the thing, they say, this is a very intense medicine, but the question is, what is this a medicine for?
But don't they use it now to treat addiction? Like you do some sort of microdosing of mushrooms, and then you don't have the addiction the next day.
It never fails. You're always locked in. You're always just right on the money.
Late.
And this did you? Did you?
Yes, I did.
I mean, if we're going to list favorite medicines, caffeine is right at the top.
Okay, here's the thing. We've got to give a nod to our new sponsor.
Yeah, we do.
Episode 1. So we have a new sponsor. It's actually an old sponsor. It's the guys from Choppy Streams, same company.
Guys.
And then we will continue with this crazy story. Like I got to see where this is going.
You got to wait. You got to wait till after the break.
Ever wanted to get out of a lunch plan at the last minute, forgot to call mom on her birthday, or just needed a plausible reason to take a day off from work? Well, you're in luck. From the creators of Choppy Streams, the only browser-based video scrambler to get you out of those endless Zoom meetings, comes Excuse AI, the first AI-powered personal excuse creator app. Excuse AI leverages a robust set of data, including real-time geospatial information, to provide you with a personalized and optimized, unquestionably credible-sounding excuse. Excuse AI tracks and stores your history of excuses, so you'll never use the same excuse twice or get caught using conflicting information. And if you want to take your excuse to the next level, try Excuse AI Premium and turbocharge your excuse with irrefutable support in the form of AI-generated documentary evidence. This can include emails, photos, even voice recordings. The days of "the dog ate my homework" are history. Sign up for Excuse AI today with code KMA Podcast, and you'll receive 25% off your first 5 excuses. Not using Excuse AI? What's your excuse now? I feel like the transition music is appropriate for this episode in some ways. Like, it's upbeat. You know what I mean? Like, although the trips are terrible, but I mean, the clarity. We're focusing on the clarity the next day.
Such a good mood. It's just, I don't know what that was. Was that a rumba? I don't know what you call that.
We're going to look into that. It is officially licensed, though. Let's just leave it at that. I don't want to get calls, about rights.
Now, when we left off, our cliffhanger was, look, this is all great. Hoffman came up with this medicine, but, Sandoz, we're here to sell medicine. So if we're going to sell this thing, like, what's the disease that this thing treats? So he and his lab start sending out thousands and thousands of free doses to doctors and researchers all around the world, asking them.
It's like Oxycontin or something.
To conduct their own. Yeah, mostly he sends it to Ohio and Pennsylvania. No.
The original pill mill. Did he invent the pill mill? Is that what we're talking about?
Imagine just like, so in the old days, like you worked at a doctor's office and free LSD.
I literally saw a photo of some cough syrup from the 20s, and the 3 top ingredients were all like illegal drugs.
Yeah. Okay. So he sends it out all over the world and says, do your own experiments, do your own research, see what this thing might be useful for. Some of the most immediate, early, enthusiastic adopters of this medicine are psychiatrists.
Of course.
They see promise for using LSD in conjunction with talk therapy. One of the earliest proponents of this is English-born psychiatrist working up in Canada named Humphrey Osmond. He was treating alcoholics in Saskatchewan, Canada. Wow. Lovely area.
He doesn't turn out to be the Osmond patriarch.
He does not. He does turn out to be the guy who comes up with the word psychedelic.
No way. Are you serious?
Yeah, it comes from.
That's just as cool.
It comes from psyche, mind, and delos, the Greek word delos, which means clear or manifest. So it's like
say mind. That first name again.
So psyche, mind, and then delos. For clear or manifest. So he's saying this is something that makes manifest. I don't know. It opens up the mind. It somehow manifests. I don't know. Anyway, other people using LSD in their psychiatric practice include some guys down in California, Sidney Cohen, Mortimer Hartman, and then the psychologist Betty Eisner. But listen to who one of the patients who reports radical success and starts talking anywhere he can about LSD, including to Better Housekeeping or whatever that magazine was called. The movie star, Cary Grant.
What?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say Timothy Leary. Like, wasn't he the big LSD guy?
Cary Grant, even before Leary. In fact, Leary finds out about LSD in part by reading what Cary Grant is saying about LSD. Cary Grant, famous for movies like North by Northwest, Notorious, one of my favorites, The Philadelphia Story.
Didn't he have a relative or someone on the Andrea Doria?
Oh, did he?
Yeah, who I thought introduced him to LSD.
Yeah, that was his ex-wife, Ruth Roman. Oh, my Lord.
And didn't she introduce him to LSD?
Buddy.
This is a tie-in from season 1.
Dude, what kind of coffee did you have today? This is
what I'm going to start doing. Post 4:00 coffee. Why not?
Yeah, but do we have to wait till only when the wife's out of town?
Yeah, we might.
Yeah.
For that kind of infringement. You know what I'm saying? Okay, or infraction.
Cary Grant winds up taking LSD approximately 100 times between 1958 and 1961.
Who has that kind of time? Over what period of time? You said a year?
3 years. He says the combined effects of LSD and therapy help him overcome some long-standing personal issues.
I think that qualifies as abuse. That's a lot of LSD.
The fear of intimacy, as well as the tension between his public persona and his internal sense of self.
Wait, isn't this the drug that when we were in high school, they said if you do it 3 times, you're legally insane?
That's
this guy did it 100 times in
100
times. A weekend? What?
There's a good documentary about this whole thing called Becoming Cary Grant. Check it out.
Okay.
Elsewhere, the psychiatrist Stanislav Grof from the Czech Republic, he's pretty excited too. He says LSD will become to psychiatry and the neurosciences what the telescope was to astronomy and the microscope to chemistry, biology, and physics.
Wow.
He's all stoked.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
Another big fan, perhaps unexpectedly, is Bill Wilson. Do you know who Bill Wilson is?
Sounds familiar, but no.
He's the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Okay. I try to keep his name under wraps. So I didn't want to let on.
Sorry,
you know what I'm saying? Because it is kind of outing him.
Yeah.
But, okay.
So if maybe we can edit it. Bill W. Bill W. does his first acid trip as part of a trial program at the VA hospital right here in Los Angeles on August 29th, 1956. He's blown away, says he thinks this could really be helpful for alcoholics.
See, that's what I was saying. They use this once and then you're cured of your addiction. Or in some cases, post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah, that's what Bill W. thinks. He says this is the thing, but he takes it to the governing board. They think he's lost his mind. They were that goes completely, they're like, dude, it literally goes against like our creed. I mean, our whole creed is sobriety before anything else.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Except I will note cigarettes and coffee. Those are allowed at AA meetings.
Right.
And I say that with admiration, being a lifelong.
Right. Sobriety, caffeine, and nicotine first.
Exactly. Then LSD. Anyway, he has to step down from the board because they're concerned about that.
But he's not advocating either do this or you can't become sober.
His basic thing is it allows you to experience a feeling state, a sort of connection with spirituality and divinity that he thinks is very helpful moving forward.
I see.
Anyway, okay, Guess who else wants to get in on the LSD game and gets in big?
No idea.
The CIA.
What?
The CIA.
Are we on a hard line? I don't even know if we're allowed to talk like this.
Okay. Well, so just you can beep that out. But America's spy agency, and maybe people will be able to figure that out. Let's switch over to Telegram for the remainder of this episode. The CIA wonders, hey, this new weird miracle drug that we're hearing whispers about, could we maybe use that either as a truth serum in interrogations or as a bioweapon against adversaries? Okay.
Unbelievable.
They're not really sure what, but the CIA conducts thousands of experiments. Mostly,
and this is before it's approved. The CIA is just kind of going with it. Okay.
Yeah, it's the Wild West. Thousands of experiments, mostly with participants who are not even aware, let alone consenting that to being drugged. This is part of the larger super hush-hush program called MK Ultra, which eventually gets shut down in 1973. MK Ultra for the purpose...
That's not to be confused with KMA Podcast, right?
No, although we're open to cross-branding if they ever start MK Ultra back up again. But MK Ultra was a horrible thing. They did things like, they experimented with things like electroshocks, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture, plus high doses of LSD on people who had not realized they were taking LSD. Ugh. That's all a bummer because that is a thing. That's not cool. If, somebody who's given a medicine and they don't even know that they're being given a medicine.
That's terrible. That is torture. That's ridiculous.
But in the 1960s, basically, things start to fall apart. There's a couple of Harvard professors. You've already told us about one of them.
Timothy Leary.
The other one is Richard Alpert, who later changes his name to Ram Dass.
No way.
These guys get really excited about LSD. And they start encouraging young people everywhere to tune in, and drop out of mainstream society.
Right, that's where that comes from.
And importantly, drop out of any military service.
Whoa, these are academics saying that.
Yeah, they get fired by Harvard. But in the 1960s, basically, to summarize, LSD escapes the lab. Okay, the Beatles start doing it. They talk about it. They sing about it. The Grateful Dead are using it.
Everybody.
A lot of their fans are using it. In fact, one of the Grateful Dead's audio engineers, a kid named Owsley Stanley, who's the grandson of a former Kentucky governor, turns out, in addition to being an audio engineer, he turns out to be a very gifted chemist. Basically, if you had LSD on the West Coast in the 1960s, there was a very good chance this kid, Owsley, made it.
Wow.
He turns out high-grade, pharmacy-grade LSD. Gradually, LSD becomes associated, along with marijuana and other substances, with the anti-Vietnam War movement, with the whole hippie kind of back to nature
drug
thing.
culture, like that whole movement.
Student protests, youth in general. And, and it should be noted that, like, whenever you take a medicine that's that powerful and just put it out on the street without any strict dosing guidelines or medical supervision, or, even going back to ancient times, because, ancient human cultures used things like ayahuasca and stuff like that. But at least they had like fungus. But they had like, exactly, that plant, that fungus ergot, it appears was used in ancient rites in ancient Greece at a place called Eleusis. But anyway, my point is that when they were used way back then, there were rites and rituals, and there was a framework for it. But like when you just like pour LSD out into America and just let anybody do it at any dose they want without supervision, it's kind of a disaster.
Well, it's like Easy Rider, and like there's so many movies of that period which are these haunting tales of people doing LSD,
and
like
the media,
it's pretty crazy.
And the media jumps on it and they start hyping it up. They say LSD is triggering schizophrenia, it's triggering psychosis, it's triggering mania. The Nixon administration is fully on board with
I'm sure doing more LSD
with seeing LSD as a disaster.
He woke up with a lot of clarity. I think I need to resign. You know what?
They're especially bummed about, with the idea that somehow this is part of what's fueling the anti-war movement. So 1970, that's D-Day for LSD in America. It becomes illegal in America. 1970, incidentally, is the same year that the baseball player, Doc Ellis, pitches a no-hitter for the Pittsburgh Pirates against the San Diego Padres. And according to him, anyway, he did so while fully tripping on acid.
I mean, can you imagine the batters?
Doc Ellis had not realized he had not realized that he would start that evening, and he had taken LSD at a friend's house in the morning, but then it turned out he was slated to start, but it all works out. Somehow he pitches not only a complete game, but a no-hitter. I will point out for our baseball fans in the audience that it was a no-hitter, which is amazing.
Incredible.
But he did walk 8 batters and hit another one with a pitch. So it's not like his command was perfect.
Look, he was half the time seeing, like a cartoon.
He said at one point he thought the umpire was Richard Nixon. At another point, he thought the batter was Jimi Hendrix and that he was swinging a guitar at him.
Oh my God.
Okay, the following year, 1971.
It's like he's playing an early version of Nintendo, right? Or like the VR game. But that's insane. I do remember that. I think Ken Burns had that in his documentary.
Real? Oh, I haven't seen that one. I want to see the new one. There's a new one on buffaloes.
Oh, nice.
Or buffalo. I'm not sure what the plural is. Okay, 1971, the UN has a big vote saying they're concerned about LSD too, and it starts to become illegal in all the rest of the world also. This shuts down all the sort of like legitimate medical research which had been continuing in labs and hospitals and addiction clinics and psychiatric practices around the world. Now, of course, there's still massive illegal manufacture and usage of the drug. And in California, at least, there's still some shrinks who are continuing on the down low to use it in conjunction. But for the most part, the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s become sort of the dark age for LSD. A person caught with the stuff is looking at prison time, sometimes quite a lot of it, and that's a bad trip.
Yeah.
Small wonder then that our hero, good old Dr. Albert Hofmann, the nerdy Swiss chemist who started this whole mess. It's a small wonder then that he later titled his book about LSD, Mein Sorgenkind.
Yeah, that's what I would have gone with.
Which means my problem child.
Oh.
However, in the 2010s, so this is what you're talking about, a renaissance starts to happen.
Is he around for this, or is he already?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he becomes like, he's around for it. And he becomes sort of like the Ruth Bader Ginsburg, like they trot him out on stage when he lives to be 102 years old, and he keeps using LSD till the very end.
Are you serious? He's the Cary Grant of the science world.
He does it, I think he does it maybe once a year. And
he
likes to go hiking in Switzerland, but he lives to 102, so it can't be that bad for you. Anyway, but they trot him out on stage, and the young people go nuts because he's this cute little guy with white hair who kind of comes shuffling out on stage.
They should create like a doll of him, or like
or like a bobblehead, and he's got like a beaker in one hand. I would buy that.
I could totally see that.
Are you kidding me? In the U.S., in the starting around 2010, in the U.S., there's an activist named Rick Doblin who starts the arduous process of trying to loosen the American ban on research.
Right, much harder probably to undo what's been done.
He has some specific things. He says it's a good tool against possibly for addiction. It's a good tool for helping people quit cigarettes.
Right.
And a good tool for people who have quote unquote end of life anxiety after receiving a terminal diagnosis.
Right.
Okay, so those are some of the things.
Specific purposes. Right.
Yeah. And bit by bit, the federal government does start to weaken the ban, and they let researchers like Dr. Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins and Dr. Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico start to study these substances. And then, kind of for like you and me, for lay people, we become aware of it when the journalist Michael Pollan writes about this new research in the New Yorker magazine. Then he writes a best-selling book called How to Change Your Mind. And he I don't think he had ever used any of these substances, but for this book, he kind of like uses each of them and writes about it. Whatever.
Interesting. And introduces it to the mainstream of like, here's the plausible way in which this might be effective.
Yeah. And now and then that book in turn is adapted into a Netflix documentary.
Oh, really?
Which, you can see. It's called How to Change Your Mind. Okay. Specific. Now, you may have heard and it seems like you are aware of this renaissance that's been going on, that some people talk about the power of microdosing. So this is like, much, much, much smaller doses. Somebody who writes a book about that is, do you know the novelist Michael Chabon?
Yes, of course. Okay. He also wrote a children's book.
His wife is an Israeli-American woman, Ayelet Waldman, and she wrote a book called A Really Good Day, How Microdosing Made a Mega Difference in My Mood, My Marriage, and My Life. That's pretty good read.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Pro. That's a pro.
She's pro.
Yeah. What kind of dosage? Like you mentioned that he took the 0.25.
Yeah. So that's what they call 2 milligrams, or you can bust it down to micrograms. So he took 250 micrograms, felt like that was a little too much. Then later the standard sort of like for people who wanted a full on trip was like 200 micrograms. This woman, Ayelet Waldman, I think she's probably taking something like 10 micrograms once every 4 days, something like that.
Got it.
So we are in a renaissance now, but history tells us that there's always going to be the inevitable, backlash and clampdowns. It seems like a pendulum with these things. And now we're kind of in a period that's sort of similar to the 60s where it's like, oh yeah, let's try out that. But I'm just saying, there's a chance that like skip forward another 20 years and the federal government has decided again, no, that wasn't a good idea. So I'm just saying.
But can someone who has a nicotine addiction, for example, get a prescription to do this as a therapy, or is that not available today?
Not yet. I mean, you can as part of no. You can, like Johns Hopkins is the leader in that.
You just admit it. You have to go downtown.
You do have to go downtown or to Canada. Certain localities now are sort of legalizing or decriminalizing these, like Santa Cruz, Oakland, Denver, like little piece by piece.
That's going to take a long time. Those are tiny pieces. So, I mean, generally speaking, is someone conducting scientific studies that they can quickly get approved, or is that not?
Yeah. No, they're all different, and this is the hot field of research right now. So all the universities, NYU, Johns Hopkins, Cal, Berkeley, all have like centers for psychedelic sciences where they're doing these studies and they're submitting them as part of the FDA approval process. So you know what I mean? Like they are in the process of trying to convince the government.
You should study that stuff, right? Like that's what science is for. Like if it can advance our ability to understand how to treat addiction, we should know about it.
Well, the other one one is like sometimes MDMA, which I guess the kids nowadays call Molly. People believe that might have use for like our veterans coming home from the war,
PTSD.
or people who've undergone like a super intense trauma, like rape or war or whatever. But it's a slow process getting FDA approval, but it does seem like it's moving in that direction. Just wrapping up here, some of the people who've claimed that they benefited from LSD were Steve Jobs, Bill Gates.
I heard of all of these so far. Don't break my record.
The neurologist Oliver Sacks.
Yes, of course. Sure. Unfortunately, I know he passed away, but he was a great, also wrote for the New Yorker quite
Such
a bit.
Good writer.
Great storyteller.
The French theorist Michel Foucault.
Yes.
Never read his stuff, but my friend Maury has read his stuff. TV actor Larry Hagman.
Who?
The TV actor Larry Hagman.
Dallas?
Yeah.
I Dream of Jeannie?
Yeah. He was on CNN.
What a lofty title you're giving. Wait, who came right before him? Who was that guy?
Michel Foucault.
I can picture his name on the books at every airport. I mean, and now you're putting Larry Hagman? Did he even win an Emmy? He wasn't even in MASH. Like, what's so great about it? I guess he actually was a really good astronaut on I Dream of Jeannie.
I only include him because there's a hilarious YouTube clip where I don't remember if it's CNN. Somebody's interviewing him on TV, and they're just, he's retired and he's like living the good life. He's on his like ranch in Santa Barbara someplace, and he's just like smiling, and they're like, God, you seem like you're in a great place. What's your secret? And he says LSD, and they're like,
Gosh, are you serious?
Yes.
Oh my! He was so ahead of his time.
Yeah, it's worth checking out. Okay, and just to wrap up, because we're running long, the date of that day that poor Albert Hoffman tried to ride his bicycle home from the lab, as I said, that's called Bicycle Day. It sounds like he was like riding a bicycle through a Salvador Dali painting, where like the road is melting and the sky
turned into the Scream.
But that's Bicycle Day, and that comes right before April 20th, which cannabis users celebrate 420. So, and Hoffman, he did not just kick back and say, look at me, I invented LSD. He kept on going. He was the one who took all these reports about magic mushrooms in Mexico and said, okay, bring me some of those. And he's the one who identified what are the active agents, the psychoactive agents there. And those are psilocin and psilocybin. So he gets that.
Mushroom.
Yeah. He's also the one who figured out what was causing the psychoactive effects of something I didn't even know had psychoactive effects. And that's the seeds of morning glory flowers.
What? He has quite a long leash. I mean, where is he finding inspiration to test that out?
Not only that, where is he, like, you would think at a certain point, Sandoz would be like, this is all great, but dude, like, you haven't, like, we're looking for like Advil.
Right,
or like, we need something to sell. And the problem with these,
we're not looking for fragrance. We're looking for effectiveness. And you're giving us the stargazers. Like, we need like aspirin.
Lived to be 102 of LSD. He wrote about LSD. I believe that if people would only learn to use LSD's vision-inducing capabilities more wisely under suitable conditions in medical practice or in conjunction with meditation, then in the future, someday, this problem child could become a wonder child.
It's like he's writing the marketing lingo, when this becomes commercialized.
I think he was happy toward the end of his life because he realized, like, okay, the pendulum's swinging back in the direction of people starting to openly discuss it again.
And he'll go down in history as the inventor of LSD.
Yeah.
And potentially an alternative therapy that's more effective than anything anyone could dream of down the line. We have no idea.
Yeah, although one problem with it, unlike things like Prozac, which people have to take every day, one problem just in terms of capitalism is some of these psychedelics, like these people who have, end of life anxiety, like you take it once and then you kind of get the message. Like, so a typical anecdote for somebody who uses it to quit smoking is like, oh, in the trip, I realized sort of what I was doing to my body. I took a trip inside my body. I saw what was forming on my lungs, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, like, they don't really feel like they need to then keep taking this. Like, they got the info then. So it's not something like Prozac where you got to take it every day. So there are still some questions about, is it going to be a great moneymaker really for pharmaceutical companies? Because it's not like coffee where you want it every single day. It's like, you go through it.
Yeah, but you could put a value on the efficacy, right? Like if you're going to cure your addiction, addiction, what would you pay for that?
Yeah, and I guess you could also monkey around with like, okay, well, our patent is not on the pill. It's on like the pill and our kind of therapy that we do in conjunction with. I mean,
Right. Well, I mean, the bottom line is that you hear all those stories when you read about history of what they were using for various ailments, and they were constantly experimenting with stuff.
How did people figure this stuff out? Like that thing that the Aaron Rodgers, the ayahuasca, that is some weird concoction where they have to brew together like the root of this and the bark of that, and they got it and they've been using it for thousands of years. Like there must have been people who died mixing in the wrong stuff. You know what I mean?
Without a doubt. Not everyone is a chemist. Like if you said, hey, this weekend, whip up a batch of LSD, just do your best. Come on, there's chemistry kits everywhere, and you took chemistry. So there's you're not going to take that chance. So it's different.
Yeah.
But it's definitely interesting that it's evolved to now we're synthetically trying to recreate some of the chemistry that has been used organically throughout history to achieve the same effects, but then to just, perfect it.
It's such a bummer that when the Europeans came to North America, hindsight being 2020, it would have been nice if instead of like all the shooting and, stealing land and giving out smallpox to everybody, if they just did it like a good, basic interview, like, oh, so what do you use this plant for? Right. And how do you cure this? And because think of all the knowledge that died when
Before we kill you, how have you guys survived? Because we're going to have to survive.
We haven't been able to grow.
We're starving, but we're not doing something. You guys seem pretty fit. Yeah, it's a little bizarre.
Speaking of starving, quick throwback. I'm starting a new mini segment here at the very end, killer content. I want to give a recommendation. You wrote, or rather you presented about, maybe it was Pocahontas, and you revealed to me something I'd never heard of, and it was the starving time.
Right.
Like the settlers' way, just terrible. I am reading a great book, which a listener sent me, a listener from Bolton Landing, New York.
Nice.
On Lake George. This listener sent me a book. It's called The Vaster Wilds, and it's a woman who's just about to die at the fort during the starving time. She's like, screw it. I'm getting out of here. If the Indians can live out there, I got to get out of here. And it's just about her break from the fort and then trying to stay alive out in colonial America, just in the woods. Excellent.
May have to do a killer biography bonus episode. That sounds incredible.
Killer content. The Vaster Wilds. Available on Amazon. Dr. Geller, I couldn't be any more excited about Killer Means Awesome, the new rebranding, season 3, Killer Inventions.
Incredible, and what an incredible start! Like almost like a trip in and of itself.
Yeah,
the inventor of LSD. Like who would have thought you'd go with the chemist and the invention of psychedelics?
Yeah, Dr. Albert Hoffman, and I really can't wait to see what you come up with next week.
It's going to be interesting.
Are we teasing that?
No, we're not going to. We're just going to trust that it's going to be incredible.
I mean, it always is, but it felt like maybe you were going to tease it.
It did feel that way, and ultimately, it's not going to happen. But what I do want to say is we're going to play our outro music, the new outro music.
Oh, I can't wait.
For Killer Inventions. As you mentioned, season 3 of Killer Means Awesome. Please remember to follow the show and share the show, right? That's the best thing we can do.
Well, and rate it and write a review, unless you don't like it.
I didn't want to go that far, but we'll see what they say. Okay, Dr. Troyer, phenomenal story. Great way to kick off season 3. We'll see you next week.
See you then.
Brainstorm.